So here we are in Albuquerque doing the final lecture or session on church history. We're going to be talking about the modern era of the Church of God. Now, some good reference material that I believe is on this Duggar and Dodd. No, it doesn't look like it's on this bibliography I'm going to hand out. The True History of the True Church by Duggar and Dodd basically gives you a history of the Sardis era as it begins to transition into the Philadelphian era, where God used Mr. Armstrong to revive the work. And that's really where, if you want to understand one of the reasons we feel Mr. Armstrong is an apostle, there are definite functions to each one of the offices of the church. And one of the offices of the church is that of an apostle. What does an apostle do? He doesn't, he's not the head honcho, he just gets to lord it over everyone. An apostle, by function, is one who establishes and or revives an era of the church. So they reestablish the truth. Nobody discovers new truth. God's truth exists, and man is in various degrees of understanding that truth. So Mr. Armstrong was an apostle in that God used him to establish the Philadelphian era of the Church of God and to reestablish and uncover a lot of the truth that had been lost in preceding eras. And so much so that in the end, the Philadelphian era of the Church of God understands more about the truth of God more completely than any other era in history. We have more understanding of the truth of God than Abraham had. And it's just because a lot of it wasn't even available in his days. Another source would be, of course, the autobiography of Herbert W. Armstrong, which preferably, this is very difficult to do, but the original edition, the DeKachas kind of got their fingers into the second edition of the autobiography by Mr. Armstrong. They started editing it. It's nothing major, so if you have the second edition, you'll get 99% of what you need to get out of it. That's fine, but I have the second volume as it appeared serially in the Good News. I got a copy of it, and that's a much more complete volume. But believe me, brethren, it only covers up to about 1960, I think. And the truth of the matter is, it will be a fascinating book when the true history of this era of the church is finally written. It'll be just a fascinating book. Because it will be better if the writer is halfway decent, and I'm sure Christ will find a good writer. It'll be better than any spy novel you ever read for suspense and convoluted subplots and everything else. Okay, in the modern history of the Church of God in this era, how the Philadelphian era came to be, Mr. Armstrong moved to Oregon in about 1924. 1926, a neighbor discusses the Sabbath with Mr. Armstrong. That's how it got started. Mr. Armstrong got challenged to prove that the Sabbath was changed to Sunday, or prove why it shouldn't have been. And of course he assumed he should be able to do that. Now, he was very good. He's a very tenacious man, very focused man. So when he delved into studying it, it kind of consumed him for like a 6-month period. He studied not only, because he recognized you can't really look at the Sabbath in isolation. Who is it? It gets back to the two trees, is what it gets back to. Who is it that is the authority that says it will be this way and not another way? So it's God. Well, first he had to prove the existence of God. Then, if you're going to take the Bible as His Word, you've got to prove that the Bible is, an infallible Word of God. It's not just a collection of recordings of men. Then he ended up finally studying the subject of baptism and proving that it should be by immersion. And so he was baptized into the Sardis era of the church, or by a Sardis minister at that time, and began searching for the true church. 1927, Mrs. Armstrong nearly died from a blood infection. She was anointed and was healed. Mr. Armstrong discussed with the minister the subject of anointing and healing. It's important to understand, like a lot of people have gotten hung up on, was the minister that baptized Mr. Armstrong, what church was he a member of and so forth. The truth of the matter is, the Holy Spirit is only given by a minister that God recognizes as a minister. You can have hands laid on you by a Baptist all you want, and you will not receive the Holy Spirit. And you can lay your hands on each other, and it won't. I mean, that's become popular in some of the branches of the church. Some people have left the church that they can baptize one another. No, the biblical record is that Philip, as a deacon at that time, baptized people, but the apostles had to come down and lay hands on them for them to receive the Holy Spirit. Philip couldn't give the Holy Spirit because he was not a minister at that time. So it's proven that God works through His government, and that you can only receive the Holy Spirit through the laying on of hands of somebody from that government. Now, at the same time, you can learn things from people that aren't converted. A scholar that honestly studies the Word of God and honestly presents things and puts two and two together can teach you a lot of good things. He may not understand the big picture, but he at least understands that particular part of the picture. So 1927 to 1930, he began to study what should be the name of the true Church of God, and therefore decided that he should affiliate with the Seventh-day Church of God. He had the right name, kept the Sabbath, but as he began to see that it had lost almost all the rest of the truth, he studied the teachings on clean and unclean meats, smoking in principle, and so was able to come to an understanding of applying the principles in God's Word. Even though God did not discuss marijuana, tobacco, all these other things in the Bible, there are plenty of principles you can study that directly apply to them to show that you should not abuse your body in those ways. He even got some of the Sardis ministers at the time. Those of you who've read the autobiography will remember this. He got some of the Sardis ministers at the time to admit that he was teaching things that were true, biblically sound, and not taught by the Church of God Seventh Day, but they wouldn't accept it themselves. So anytime you run into an attitude like that, you're running into an attitude that God is withdrawing His understanding from. He will not bless that attitude at all. 1928, Mr. Armstrong started speaking to small groups. At this time, he was writing articles for the publication of the Seventh-day Church of God, the Bible Advocate, and yet he was ruffling feathers because he was honestly looking at some subjects that they would just as soon not look at, so eventually they didn't want him writing for them anymore. 1930, Mr. Armstrong comes to an understanding of the modern identity of the scattered lost tribes of Israel, what we know as the U.S. and B.C. in prophecy. This is during the Depression. You'll recall the accounts. Mr. Armstrong lived in poverty, and basically, I think that poverty went on for at various degrees for 27 years, as I understand it, something like that. There were times when he literally didn't have 10 cents to his name to buy milk for the baby. Remember that account, and how God brought the 10 cents to his door, basically. So God was obviously working with Mr. Armstrong and teaching him to rely upon Him. 1931, Mr. Armstrong was ordained as a minister. 1933, he began giving evangelistic campaigns, generally in cooperation with the Seventh-day Church of God, or some section of it. The Seventh-day Church of God movement was fairly fractionalized at this time. You had the Missouri Synod, you had the Oregon group, you had various groups that were semi-autonomous or totally autonomous. There was no real unity at the time. Kind of like now, right? Yeah.
On Mr. Armstrong's ordination certificate, he had a picture of it in the autobiography. When he was ordained, he was actually ordained an apostle. And that's why later Dr. Hayes said, you're an apostle. And he's like, no. He said, the ordination certificate.
But that was their standard ordination certificate, so they used that term a little loosely. The difference is...
But they still did it in past apostle. It wasn't like part of the text.
Really? Okay, well, that's interesting. But if they did that, it wasn't like that's the only time they did it, I would think. But it would be an interesting study to have done. But the proof of the pudding is, look at the number of ministers we had in worldwide. How many of those are still holding to the truth? The proof of the pudding is in what you do. You're the fruits of your life and your teachings. So, 1933, he begins the evangelistic campaigns. Now, notice one big difference between him and the Seventh-day Church of God. He felt a tremendous driving urge to preach the gospel of the kingdom of God, to do God's work. They didn't feel that way. They were fairly content with kind of resting on their laurels, in effect. That's why Christ in Revelation 3 calls them a dead church. Now, most of the time he began trying to cooperate with the Church of God Seventh-day, but eventually he quit cooperating with them because they would resist him at every turn in terms of the things that he was teaching. They could not refute them biblically, but they didn't want them taught. He went on radio for the first time in January of 1934. Again, notice a major difference. He felt a driving requirement, responsibility to do the work. These other ministers didn't. Not only that, we see how big Worldwide became. We don't see the many years that he was preaching in the wilderness. Just like we're doing today. You think Mr. O'Gwen, Mr. Meredith, and Mr. Ames don't get a little frustrated? They know that this is a nation of 280 million people, and we are this little tiny work. And I pray for those men that God keeps up their energy and their dedication, because you could get really discouraged. You're just a pipsqueak in a roar in this nation. But that didn't stop Mr. Armstrong. For many years, very few people were listening to the program, but he kept going at it. And if you heard him in his 93rd year, he still was going at it hammer and tong. He was still zealous and enthusiastic about it. I stand in awe of that. That's not humanly possible. That's spiritually possible, but that's not humanly possible. The World Tomorrow from 1934 till it finally dropped out after the apostasy, or during the apostasy, was the longest running radio program on earth. Had the largest audience of any radio program on earth. The church in Missouri, the Church of God Seventh-day, reorganized by Duggar in mid-1930s. And Mr. Armstrong was selected as one of the Council of Elders, or whatever they called it at that time. 70 elders, kind of like the Sanhedrin, I guess. The church at that time was very democratic, which is part of the reason they couldn't organize their way out of a wet paper bag. They couldn't get anything done. 1934 was the first issue of the Plain Truth. Here the man has only been converted for like 6 years, and he's publishing and on radio. He's doing more than the Church of God Seventh-day was doing at this time. 1935, they started the first church in, would have been Oregon at that time. He had 175 to 200 Plain Truth subscribers. What a small mustard seed. In the 1940s, they got onto the Mexican superstations, and you could get those throughout the United States. And that's when the church really started to grow. Up to that time, if you go back there and you read in the autobiography, the first Feast of Tabernacles that they were keeping were like 150 people. And, it's small, and it would be, it'd be like 75 one year, it'd be 150 the next year, it'd be 225 the next year, and it was growing, but still, we were tiny. And can you imagine being somebody, I'm supposed to leave my church and come to this church of 175 people, and you think you're the true church of God? What a cult, right? Thank God a lot of people didn't feel that way. And it started to really grow. 1947. Now again, the man has only been converted for be about 20 years now. He's only been ordained for about 15 or so, and here he's opening a college already. Did this man have vision? We see it from the end result. We saw Ambassador College, we saw the program, we saw all these other things. He saw it on the other end, when he had 175 subscribers and he started dreaming of a college and praying God would make it possible. And if you read about the account of how Ambassador College started, who would start a college with 4 students? I mean, that's like laughable. The man had incredible vision. 1947, Ambassador College opened. 1953, they went on radio in Europe, on Radio Luxembourg. Did this man have vision? Did he know God was working with him? Did he have faults? Oh, you bet he had faults. But I challenge you to point to any other person who's accomplished, whom God used in the past 500 years to accomplish what he did through Mr. Armstrong. It is unassailable. It is incredible. It's one of the greatest success stories, I think, in the entire 20th century. As we entered into the 1950s, the church started growing at 25 to 30% per year. Now, I came into the church at the tail end of that process in about 1968. But even then, in Montana, and we were in the boondogs of the boondocks, by about 1972, it seemed like every week we went to church, there were new people there. God was really, really blessing the church in terms of growth. Now, in retrospect, we have the opportunity to look back on that and say that obviously most of those people weren't converted. What was God doing? He needed an army to support a work that he wanted done in a certain way. Once that phase and aspect of the work was over, the army dissipated. And we have about 7,000 people in the Living Church of God and some other people scattered in some other organizations. So we're not the 150,000. We're not even close to it. We're not even a fraction of it today. 1961, the feast was in Squaw Valley, and from that we grew to where we were eventually had in dozens of feast sites around the world. 1972. How many of you go back to 1972? Okay, still a fair number of you. Which, by the way, loopy, people like that, you guys are real old-timers. I mean, real. I consider myself still kind of a young whippersnapper, but 1968 kind of makes me an old-timer too. That really is. It's amazing what we've been through. 1972, we had the first public problem with GTA and the problems that he had. Believe me, at Ambassador College in 1973, we all knew what GTA was. The only one who was blind to that pretty much was his dad, unfortunately. And Mr. Armstrong said that was the greatest single fault of his ministry. It was the fact that he was blind to the faults of Garnett Armstrong. So, 1973, 74, what happened then? How many were around 1973, 74? About the same group. Okay, well, one more with Marianne, but that's when they had a fairly large rebellion of a group of East Coast ministers, took about 20% of the church out. Really shook things up.
Is that the systematic theology project?
Nope, that was later, but good question. We'll get to that. That was later. I was there when that was being worked on.
Question here. What was the problem in 73? I was a co-worker back then, and I don't remember ever being mentioned in any of those letters.
To be frank with you, I'm not sure other than government. It was at its core, it was a government rebellion. They felt that Mr. Armstrong was too rigid on doctrine. They also wanted to experiment on doctrine.
Who was the leader of that?
That was, it wasn't it Sharp and Walter Sharp and Howard Clark? No, Howard. Who's Mrs. Chemnitz? Chemnitz, whatever his first name was. Chemnitz and Sharp.
What are they doing now?
Actually, I think one of them is and Ken Westby might have been part of that too. Okay, Ken Westby, and he's the one who's the prime pusher behind the One God movement, that Jesus Christ is not God. Remember the New Testament, very popular concept in the churches of God. There are many of the churches of God out there that are having seminars. They invite these guys in to teach their ideas that Jesus Christ is not God. And it reminds me of that scripture that says, even denying the Lord who saved them. And I always thought, how can anybody do that and claim to be a Christian? They're doing it amongst our brothers and sisters in other groups. It's an insidious heresy, frankly. It was an interesting thing because, Carl McNair, whom I hold in the very highest of regards, he was right in the middle of that, of preserving the church through those battles. I remember going through some old Worldwide Newses and seeing his picture that he was right there in the middle of keeping things together. And a lot of faithful ministers kind of earned their wings, so to speak, during that rebellion. 1974, there were this kind of was a long process, and that's when we lost about 20% of the ministry. Two of the evangelists resigned. Al Pertune. How many remember Al Pertune? Yes, indeed. And his son, Al Pertune Jr., who taught my freshman Bible. Two evangelists resigned in 1974, David Antian and Al Pertune. Al Pertune stayed resigned. David Antian slithered his way back in. And I say slithered because the man was a snake. I can tell you from direct personal experience. He came back in, but his heart wasn't repentant. He came back in to be a fifth columnist within the church. He has his own group out there, which has drifted doctrinally, by the way, quite a bit from the truth that you and I understand. Wayne Cole was temporarily put in charge of church administration. Mr. Armstrong, by the way, this is in the process of building of the auditorium. The auditorium opens in April of 1974. I helped landscape the auditorium. Mr. Armstrong took me and a bunch of us students on a personal tour while it was being under construction. It's a lot of fun to go in there and see everything. It was an exciting time in the church, even with the divisions that were happening there. 1974 was when divorce and remarriage was changed. Those of you who remember divorce and remarriage, that originally the idea was God was involved in every marriage that ever took place on earth, and so therefore there was no divorce and remarriage. And people who come into the church, second marriages had to break up their marriages. It was a horrible time. I would not have wanted to be a minister during that time because I couldn't have done that, I don't think. 1974, God knocked some sense into our heads and made us realize, I'm not involved in Buddhist marriages. I'm not involved in marriages with Catholics. I'm not involved, come on, people. So then we recognized that wasn't the case. Plus they recognized that the Apostle Paul gives some other bases on which divorce and remarriage could take place. For instance, if you're married to somebody and they divorce you and leave the church, Paul says you're not bound in that situation. It is fairly obvious. That doesn't mean that we can divorce like the world divorces. No, we can't. Not for every whim. And people really need to understand that because some people get married too lightly, even today. Okay, 1975. The end didn't come. For those of you who ever read the booklet, 1975 in Prophecy, we missed by 30 years so far, some odd. But Mr. Armstrong never intended that to be an absolute date anyway. What he did was he picked a date way off in the future, thinking, surely the end will come by then. Well, if he only knew that we'd still be plugging along in 2005, it would really have blown his mind. In February of 1975, how many of you remember the bi-weekly tabloid edition of the Plain Truth? Now that shows you your old timer. If you remember when the Plain Truth was a newspaper, okay?
That was Ted Armstrong.
That was Ted Armstrong's idea. One of the great ideas that he had, all of which never worked. Yes. Let's see now. AICF was founded in 1975. How many remember AICF and all the foo-faw that went into that? Ambassador International Cultural Foundation. That's what sponsored Vladimir Horowitz and everybody coming to the auditorium. There were some aspects of what it did were very good and impressive. There's a whole lot of vanity and junk that went into it too. Yeah, which my wife worked on Quest magazine. I wouldn't brag about that, Mom.
It's a beautiful magazine. It's beautiful.
1976, the Good News. They went back to the other, the regular Plain Truth pretty quickly because circulation went. The Good News was taken from being a general magazine to being more for the church, so stronger spiritual content. The newsstand program started in 1976. See, a lot of you. One of the seminal events of this era of the Church of God happened in 1976 as well. I graduated from college. And so did my wife. We're about one of only about 4 or 5 who graduated that year that are still left. So, kind of amazing. 1977. What happened in 1977? Anybody remember? From high school? Man, do I feel old.
Me and Brian.
That's not kind, people. Mr. Armstrong married Ramona Martin. What else happened that year? Big Sandy closed.
The Senate when it was being taken over.
Oh yeah, I'll get to that. That's not for a couple of years yet. Okay, Texas campus closes in 1977. Mr. Armstrong marries Ramona Martin in June. One of the most positive events to happen for the church of late. The Supreme Court rules that companies they reversed themselves on this. In 77, they said they don't have to give certain days off for religious reasons. Later on, they did reverse themselves and say you have an obligation as an employer to give reasonable accommodation for those type of things. So you have a fairly strong legal basis nowadays to approach people on that basis. 1977, in August, that's when Mr. Armstrong almost died of congestive heart failure. Enrollment in Ambassador College in that year was 1,330. Garner Ted Armstrong was determined to make it a huge university, and in fact he was going to buy that. Remember that huge, was it a hotel or whatever it was, huge place a couple miles from the campus, and that was going to be the headquarters for his new university. God stopped that from happening because it would have been a white elephant around the church's neck for many years. And Mr. Armstrong had always kept the attendance at each one of the campuses at a small level of no more than 400 to 600, so that people had a chance to really get to know each other and there's more of a family atmosphere. And the administration could keep tabs on what was going on, because as Garner Ted Armstrong started to grow the college, they lost control of it entirely. Marijuana, etc. If there were people there with smoking pot and the whole 9 yards.
Who never knew anything about the church.
And yeah, people would show up and didn't have any idea. Here you would send your sweet daughter to Ambassador College, and she'd be hit upon by some Iranian student the GTA recruited from Iran, who knew nothing about the church, was not even a professing Christian, and was there mainly to get women. And so GTA totally destroyed the concept of what Ambassador College was supposed to be. And I don't think it ever fully recovered from that, frankly. But Mr. Armstrong, through most of 1978, was still, yes?
They saw accreditation during that time.
Yes.
One or two times they attempted that. The second time, both never did.
Yeah. Exactly. The whole debate over accreditation happened. Then in 1978, Mr. Armstrong came back and realized, God got his attention in a way that he could not ignore. He just about died. He was bedridden for months. And he came back and put the church back on track. How many remember hearing about that? All right. He really did. He cleaned some people's clocks. He kicked some people out, including Garner Ted Armstrong. He finally woke up to getting... Well, that's a different matter. So, but yeah, but he wasn't doing it then so much.
And that's when STP went out.
That's when the STP project started. That's right before. So Mr. Armstrong comes back, and he's unaware of what GTA is doing with the Systematic Theology Project. By the way, brethren, it's a word to you or a name to you. The Systematic Theology Project was GTA's. This is the reason Mr. Armstrong never wanted to publish a statement of beliefs, because he got turned off on the concept by what GTA was trying to do. GTA wanted to codify the doctrines of the church. Not necessarily a bad thing. His way of doing it was not to write what was obviously in the literature and so forth, but was to get 30 or 40 ministers together in a room and say, what do we teach on law and grace? Each of you write a paper. So you get 30 different viewpoints of it, and you smush it all together in one document, and that becomes the official church statement of what we teach on the subject. Mr. Armstrong found out about that, and the roof of the Hall of Administration went up about 10 feet. He was absolutely livid. He said, that is not the way God determines doctrine. He says he does it through his government from the top down. It's not a compromise effort. That's what the STP was. Every doctrine they looked at, they wrote 30 different points of view on it. Bear in mind where the ministry was at this time, by the way. And they mushed it all together through compromise to produce what the church's teaching was. Mr. Armstrong said that's totally wrong. There is an organization that is the Systematic Theology Project in living form today. One of you say it, because I won't from the pulpit. Exactly. They are the systematic theology project in living form. There's a bunch of ministers who never gave up on that, and they formed their own organization eventually.
I wasn't going to say it. I was just going to say it's being practiced in Cincinnati, Ohio.
It absolutely is. I was there when it was being produced. One of my best friends was one of the prime, and he's never recovered spiritually, was one of the prime assistants working on that with Dr. Kuhn. And we have an organization, and it's because they inculcated the STP's attitude in the way they felt the church should be governed. But because Mr. Armstrong wouldn't let it happen, they never listened to all that Mr. Armstrong said about that isn't the way you do it, that is wrong, that will lead to compromise, that will lead to watering down. They didn't listen to any of that. They just kept taking the paycheck, kept their noses clean, and waited for their opportunity. Because the old man isn't going to be around forever. I think it's reprehensible, frankly. Okay, let me see. 1978, see. Mr. Armstrong puts the college back on campus. They're back on track. He was in the process. He closed it, then he opened it again with a very much more restricted faculty, with a very much more restricted student body, and he got all the liberals out of the major positions in the college.
Did he close the English?
Yeah, it isn't noted which date that was. That would be actually around 1975, because all the 1974, because all the Bricker Wood students came over. I remember them arriving at AC in Pasadena. Huh?
In 78, what was going on? Because that's when we came in and we noticed things were going, but we didn't know what was going on.
Well, most of the members, I think, in the field didn't have a clue what was going on. Believe me, you wouldn't have wanted to be in Pasadena. It was a tremendous. It's actually the single most traumatic time next to the apostasy. It really was. It was terrible to be out there as a member. But Mr. Armstrong puts Ambassador College back on track just initially in Pasadena. Eventually, he did reopen Big Sandy as well. However, in 1979, what happened then?
The attack on the church.
The receivership. And the receivership was totally bizarre time, brethren. A bunch of disaffected members. Now, I've always felt, if you don't like the Church of God, if you don't like what we teach, go attend somewhere else. Do it. You can vote with your feet. Don't mess with my church because you don't like it. Well, believe me, Joe Tkach and company weren't the first ones. They did the same thing here. This was Robert Kuhn, Garner Ted Armstrong, and a bunch of David Antian. David Antian was a big one in it. We're in this effort to get the state to kick Mr. Armstrong out and to take over the church. And it was funny the way it worked in one sense. The state came in and took everything over. They expected all of us to keep sending our tithes in like blind sheep. Almost everybody, universally, stopped payment on their tithe checks and sent them to Mr. Armstrong in Arizona. That's when he went to Arizona. And it's like the receiver we called him the deceiver. The deceiver was Hillel Shoto, yeah. He couldn't believe it. All of a sudden he had this great money machine. By the way, receivership in the legal business is a racket. These guys funnel off a tremendous amount of money. And he found out he didn't have any money coming in anymore. It was one of the most satisfying things I ever did, to go down to Wells Fargo Bank and cancel my last tithe check so I could reissue it to Mr. Armstrong.
The Big Sandy campus was up for sale, and if the sale had gone through...
Yes. He tried to sell the Big Sandy campus because he was desperate for money, right? And her father was organized a committee that legally prevented the sale from going through. So, it was an interesting time. And yet he left in the apostasy without much resistance. Go figure. So, but credit where credit's due in that regard. Now, this is the time, brethren, I could tell you stories. I will not go into detail. But I saw things in the auditorium between ministers and members should never have occurred in the Church of God. I saw ministers punching each other. It goes to show the condition of the church at the time. We were a divided house. And this is what God had to go through to clean it out. So, but God's good at doing what He sets His hand to do, and He did. So, basically the end result of it all was that the deceiver, ran out with his tail between his legs, and it all settled down. But we were in the auditorium locked inside. We weren't going to let... Oh, you were there too?
That was in the administration building.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. The administration building's where we were. I was in communications at the time. We were running the communication center. And I remember sending my wife out, telling her to bring me a bunch of science fiction books so I'd have something to read in jail. Because we had heard that the sheriff's deputies were massing at the Rose Bowl to come down and break through the doors and arrest everybody. So it would have been, and the sheriff's deputies actually, they didn't want any part of this. They really didn't. You could tell these guys were like, get me out of here. I don't want to have anything to do with this. They saw themselves on national television carrying out pregnant women and little old ladies out of the auditorium to arrest them. It's like, there's no way we're going to come out of this looking like anything but Nazis. We don't want anything to do with it. So finally the state backed down is what happened. And credit where credit's due, Joe Tkach Sr. did a wonderful job of keeping everybody's spirits up as we were trapped inside the Hall of Administration.
And all the Protestant Catholic churches came to the aid of the church.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, they recognized the threat that this was.
That they were going to be next on the list.
All right.
Some pretty significant legal things happened because of that. It was a whole process getting all the way to the Supreme Court, but then they came to side with us. ACLU.
You'd be amazed. The ACLU, liberal organizations, Lawrence Tribe, who's one of the most liberal legal specialists in the country, was filing Friends of the Court briefs and so forth. They did not have a legal leg to stand on, and they knew it. So, and the wonder is that these guys didn't end up in jail, frankly, because it was so corrupt what was going on.
Isn't that Governor Duke Majan?
Yeah, Duke Majan. And yet it was a collusion between some dissident members of the church, like I say, David Ante and all these other people behind the scenes, and the state. The idea was the deceiver and his company would get the money, and they would be able to take over the church.
What did they want? They wanted to have control and money.
It was a $150 million organization. What's one of the best rules you can do at this point? Follow the money. At that time, at least, as opposed to global, you could lust after money because there was money to be had. There were assets galore. You bet. It was about money and it was about power.
But they can't take that away from them now.
Oh, they didn't get nearly the value they wanted out of it, but I'm sure there's some Swiss bank accounts that certain people have well funded, shall we say. I think the story that's going to be told on that front will be amazing when we finally learn the details. I guarantee.
I hate to be in their shoes.
Yep, I'd hate to.
How did everybody get word to send their ties right away to,
the Church of God has a wonderful grapevine. We can get word around even then very quickly, and so that's what we did. So, any other comments?
He was sending letters from.
Yes, he was sending letters from Tucson. But we heard it in Pasadena long before those letters went out even. It was an amazing time to be in the church, I have to tell you. It was an amazing time. I don't regret having gone through that, although, by the way, the people that I saw throwing punches, what we saw was the character of a lot of these ministers, some of whom stayed with us for a long time, but every one of them involved in the negative aspects of the receivership were long gone and are long gone today. So, I say from the core of the Church of God, because I have a friend who, C. Wayne Cole is another one. If we set our hands to thwart what God is working out, it's not going to work. Period. It's not going to work.
Okay, let me ask you. Well, then these men were like just waiting for Mr. Armstrong to die, so they could.
No, they were frustrated by the fact he wasn't dying. That's why they took matters into their own hands. They were hoping he would die. It was kind of like, if they could have slipped something into his coffee, I have no doubt they would have. I kid you not. This is the level of hatred these people had for it all. But they could have gone out and joined a local liberal church of their choice. What's the only reason that would logically explain why they continue and to this day to attack the Church of God?
It's God's church. It's a true church.
And who is behind them? Satan the devil. If we let ourselves be used as an instrument by Satan, he'll be glad to take us up on it.
And we learned that helped us learn all the lessons too. We went through it, being aware now.
In retrospect, I hate what it did to many of my friends, and God will hold those people accountable. It will be a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. I believe that firmly. Yes, sir.
All you know, Mr. Koch was in a good place in the 70s.
In the 70s, he was in a good place. What none of us can see is somebody's heart, why they do what they do. And that is revealed by their later fruits.
Well, do you think it had a lot to do with his son?
No, I think he had problems of his own. Anything else? Okay. 1980, Mr. Armstrong gets back onto the television program. Remember, GTA left thinking, the whole place will fall apart because they won't have anybody to be on the television program. We coped. And we'll cope again today. July of 1980, we won in the courts. That's where one of our biggest wins on the courts were. 1981, the Advisory Council of Elders was formed, which we didn't have before. Problem with the Advisory Council of Elders is it did not have any teeth. It needed to have been institutionalized. Mr. Armstrong, though, there was a reason Mr. Armstrong was suspicious of any checks on his power. It wasn't because he was a total megalomaniac. It's because he had been stabbed in the back so many times by people he trusted. Mr. Armstrong had a fault as a manager. Great fault. Huge fault. It was, he tended to say, here, take care of this, and then when he focused this direction, he had blinders on. He was a one-track-minded kind of a guy. And that's not the way to manage. You've got to keep some tabs on whether they're doing what you told them to do, and that's what he didn't do. Happened to him repeatedly. He had been stabbed in the back so many times his back looked like a pincushion, okay? So there was a reason he was very hesitant to share in. But what needed, if the Advisory Council of Elders had a stronger role in three-quarter of them had to agree to any doctrinal change, it would have made what happened under Joe DeKach a lot harder. But it would have happened anyway, brethren. It was God's purpose to purge the church.
Well, Mr. Wade, he was telling us that about 5 or 6 ministers were trying to get him to go with them. And he said, wouldn't. He stuck to his guns.
Yeah, and that's the key. Now, Big Sandy reopens in 1981, and in 1986, Mr. Armstrong died. Now, from the point of view of remember back when you were young in the church, when you first came into the church, could you imagine being 20 years beyond the death of Mr. Armstrong, and the end still isn't yet? There's a reason God doesn't let us know how long we've got to go, because if it's longer than what we're prepared to go, we get discouraged. So we have to keep the sense of urgency, because in one sense, if your heart stops beating now, guess how close the end is for you? Ultimately that is true. So therefore, in one sense, the end was just as close to the first century as it is to us today. But at the same time, look at the aspects of prophecy that Mr. Armstrong is predicting for 40 years that have happened. So it's not like we can sit around here and expect to be here in 50 years. We won't be. Okay, Mr. Armstrong dies. Joe DeKach comes into the head of Worldwide and begins the doctrinal changes. Now, he brings in Joe DeKach Jr., who Mr. Armstrong had specifically told him to get rid of, because Mr. Armstrong at least saw what a snake he was. Joe DeKach Jr. and Mike Feazell, Greg Albrecht, Bernie Schnippert, all worked in the background to push the church where it was headed. By the way, did you hear Ron Kelly just retired? Yeah. They've got a new financial guy now. But anyway, so Joe DeKach Sr. died. Does anybody remember when that was? I don't have the exact date. It was a couple of years later, wasn't it? Probably. Okay. We left when? Right before the feast in 1995. So therefore, it would have had to have been in the early 90s, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, about Earl Williams. Yeah. Again, that was a seminal moment for most of us coming out of Worldwide, is when we caught them in the first blatant, provable, we knew they were lying to us. Once you figure that out, you can't trust them anymore at all. I figured it out when I was going through a booklet that they said they'd only made slight revisions of. I got out the old booklet, got out the new booklet. They totally changed what the booklet said. So you lie to me, I can prove it. I'm not trusting you anymore. Okay, so then after Joe Tkach died of pancreatic cancer, by the way, Joe Tkach Jr. takes over and the apostasy accelerates. 1992, around January, Mr. Meredith, well actually later in 92, Mr. Meredith was kicked out of, basically given an ultimatum, kicked out of Worldwide, and he founded the Global Church of God. Notice what happened almost immediately after the founding. There were other organizations that said, give us time, we'll do a work, give us time. And 10 years later, they're still asking for time. Well, within weeks of Mr. Meredith's founding the Global Church of God, we were on radio and publishing a magazine. Again, the same focus, the same spirit was motivating Mr. Meredith as was motivating Mr. Armstrong. That's not parochialism, that's just stark facts. 1995 was when I left, and most of what forms the church today, I'd love to know the percentage, but I think a majority of those in the church today left the church in 1995. I think God brought a lot of us to a puke point, as I call it, where we were coming up on Passover, and it's like, I cannot keep Passover with Worldwide again. I just can't. So I've got to go somewhere. And that's what happened with Diane and myself. And how many of you left in 95? All right, how many of you left in 94? Now, see, look at that. Look at the difference. Everybody hold your hand up that left in 95. Hi. Diane, come on. All right. Now, keep them up, keep them up. All right, roughly half of the people here left in 95. Now, and I asked how many left in 94, there wasn't one hand that went up. How many left in 96? 93. Well, okay, you don't count. No, you're part of the original group, and really that was the core of what got Global going. But nonetheless, it was notable how many people left in 95.
What I think is really notable also is all of those who left after 95, God is not going to allow any of his to be left behind.
Yeah, please don't understand. I do not think there's any superiority to when you left, by the way. God worked with everybody in their own time as to when the proper time to leave was. I'm amazed looking back on it that I didn't leave in 93, but something kept me there for 2 more years, and it was 2 of the most gut-wrenching years I've ever been through in my life.
Mr. Gilpin, Frank, we didn't leave because we thought something was going to happen. Okay?
We were trained that Christ would put the church back on track.
Because he did once.
He did once. But we did not understand church history, that this type of thing has happened many, many times before. Okay, I got to rush a little bit here. We've only got a few more minutes. 1998. How many of you were around in 1998 for the disruption, as we call it, when Living Church of God was founded? All right. Okay, 1998, essentially it was the same thing that had happened in every other church rebellion. They were motivated by Satan to go after power. There was no more money to go after anymore, but there was power still. Power over 7,000 people. Yes, sir. Absolutely. In fact, Carl McNair told me a year after the disruption in 98 that he didn't have it in him to go through it again. He had fought too many battles. Yeah.
And Mr. Gilchrist, it was Global, then he changed to Living. What happened there?
A group tried to kick Mr. Meredith out because they didn't like how he was conducting the work. They wanted actually to merge with United. They wouldn't admit it, and when you call them on it, they'd swear up and down that wasn't their purpose at all. Where is the bulk of the group that left with Global, stayed with Global when Living was founded? They are now in United. A few ministers are in something called Church of the Eternal God, but it's so small you need a magnifying glass to find it. And Dave Pack started his own group. You know that Dave Pack was the genesis of it all happening? They wanted to challenge Mr. Meredith's right to fire Dave Pack. And so they did try to challenge it. It grew up as who's in control of the church business. The board, which was never intended to have any authority over the church, The Council of Elders was supposed to be Larry Salyer. The board was never supposed to have authority over the church, and they used maneuverings to use the board to try to take over the church.
Adair's death gave them a majority.
Yeah, it was hanging in the balance until Mr. Adair died. Then they had a majority on their side.
And Mrs. Meredith had resigned her position because somebody convinced them that women should have that kind of position.
And what they were doing is maneuvering to get charge of the board so that they could take over. Well, they got what they wanted. They got the debts of Global. There was no money to be had. And you know what they did? Rather than make any attempt, because they had the money to pay a lot of those debts back, they frittered the money away, and they did not. And then they went bankrupt. You know, there are people who invested their life savings in the church, and they had the money to pay those people back. Now, they lied about what they really wanted to do, and they stole the money. I mean, should they have any respect at all from any Christian? As far as I'm concerned, no. And then none of them have apologized for it to this day. And frankly, Mr. McNair's brother was part of that effort. And he's another one who came back to us, and there were a lot of us who had our doubts about that, but the fruits showed, didn't they? Okay. Notice what happened right after the founding of Living? We were back on radio, television, and publishing within weeks. Okay, I think that covers most of it. And Diane mentioned that Dave Pack formed a Restored Church of God. I don't know if you've heard. He's anointed himself an apostle now. And he's got a bunch of stuff. He's also saying that Katrina was a direct judgment from God, and people all deserved it, kind of stuff. Okay. Other small splinters, the splinter that was Global, they all faded off into the sunset. None of them are doing a significant work today, by the way. Okay, now, that concludes the church history thing, our series. I'd like to offer to anybody who would like a copy of Ron Kelly's, and I mean, don't judge it on the basis of it being Ron Kelly, because at this time he had his head on straight. Ron Kelly's church history master thesis, Dean Blackwell's master thesis, again, same comment on Dean Blackwell, Ivor Fletcher's church history, and the first 2,500 years thesis that Roy Schultz did. I mentioned that gave pre-flood history. I've got all those online, and I'd like to make them available to anybody. If you're interested, send me an email. And
Fletcher's online.
it is too. I've got it.
The whole book?
The whole book. So if you'd like it, send me an email or give me a note. If you don't have email, I'll burn it on a CD for you. Although you will need a computer to read it. And then if somebody, can I have a couple of people up here to help pass this out? This is a selected biography of the history of the true Church of God. What's that? Oh, yeah. Girls, go ahead.
They're all shy. Oh, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
What is our take on the advisory council with women being on there now? Do we have that? Or?
I don't know if there's an official stance on it. I think it's a tremendous idea, but I don't know what. I think that'd be a great way to use the experience of Mrs. McNair and Mrs. O'Gwen.